Welcome to another 88K model railroad video, and in this video we're going to do a follow-up of the board validations from a week or so ago. Now before I get into things, let's do a little bit of the housekeeping. On the lower right hand corner you see the green band. The green band is an indication that this is an affiliated link video. Now, I'm not sponsored by anyone. I purchased these boards myself. Whenever I purchase the board, I note where I got the board from, and that's how I get my affiliated links. And what it does is it ensures that you guys get the same board that's in the video. And that way there's no questions, or you don't kind of get that bait and switch scenario where you're working on one board but the video is showing another. So I make sure everything's lined up so that way no one's confused. So let's get back to the video itself. As you recall, I went through 3 boards initially. The ESP32 D1 Mini 32 was the first board, then the ESP32 Dev module board, that was the second one. Those were good. The third board, which was the ESP-ROVER module, that board had issues and it would not establish the Wi-Fi connection. But I was able to resolve that issue, and I ended up learning a lot more about the other boards themselves, and it brought in actually the board number 5. So, but we'll talk about that later. And now with the Lowland D32 board. Now initially I had left that board or excluded it from the list because they were difficult to get, but then I found one online, and it seems like there's some cloning agreement or something of that sort, because those boards are readily available, and because of that I brought it back in. So now we've got a total of 5 boards. So let's get into the WROVER module and what I did to get that installed. With the ESP32 WROVER board, there was an issue with the board sustaining its Wi-Fi connection on its own, and meaning that in order for the Wi-Fi connection to come up, you actually had to connect your computer to the USB port, then access a terminal, and as soon as you access the terminal, then the Wi-Fi would work. And that became a big problem. So the workaround is to reflash it with the Room 32 bin. Once you reflash it, then the board will act as a room. Now the WROVER module and the Room module are identical in the sense of the way that it's structured, but the WROVER has extended memory, or the SRAM, and because it has the SRAM, it uses different GPIO pins, and that creates a bit of conflict for when we want to use it for the WIO bin. So when you apply the room bin to the board, to the WROVER board, there's a conflict with GPIO 16 and 17, and what that does is that knocks out 2 of the IOs, which is pin 6 and 7. So you'd omit pin 6 and 7 for the IOs, and then the other 14 pins will work. So it's worthwhile to reflash it to get this board working, if you guys already have one. Then when you go to the OTA process, you just use the Arduino IDE. You can flash the rotor file, that Rockwell over the air file, and you use the Room DA module in the Arduino. So once that's done, then you could go through the regular installation process and then install Rockwell's ESP32 D1 Mini. That's a Room bin. So you put that in, and then you can get that WROVER board working. So next we'll go to the Lowland. So next is the Lowland 32 board. Now, initially, the board I had taken it off of the list because of the availability of the board. The WEMOS Lowland board, which I think is the original board, was difficult to get. But I was able to find the clone type of that board, which is a Lowland 32 board. It's a little different in that the power connector or input connector is shifted over to the or pointed towards the left versus pointed downwards as you look at the USB port. So there is some difference in the boards, but functionality it's the same. It has the Room 32 bin, and the 16IO ports are fully functional. The only caveat is it requires a capacitor to flash. You cannot manually flash it with your hands by holding and trying to ground the pins. The sequence or the strapping sequence and the time parameters or intervals is within the milliseconds. So from the time the pin or I shouldn't say the pin, from the time that the chip powers up and that power up signal goes high, you only have a millisecond to try to trigger to go into flash mode. And that's why a lot of guys complain that it's inconsistent, but what's inconsistent is their ability to flash the pin or the strap within a millisecond. That's what the problem is. So as long as you run a capacitor in the circuit, you'll be okay. And I'll have an image of what it looks like. And I just used a regular, it's like a 35 volt 100 microfarad capacitor, and that was able to do the job. And they have like faster capacitors they put in the descriptions, but I was able to use this slower 100 microfarad capacitor, and it was okay. The flash process is pretty much the same. You use the factory room bin file, and then with the Rockwell update, you add the Lowland 32 WIO bin, and everything will come up. You'll be okay there. So the next we'll go into the WEMOS D1 R32 board. So we're at board number 5. It's the WEMOS D1 R32 board. This board is a derivative of the Arduino board, and it uses the or the room chip, and it functions like an Arduino. So I think a lot of the Arduino guys are going to like using this board with the WIO, and it gives you kind of a broader reach to different components and what you can do based upon the sketches, the Arduino sketches. Now, getting this board working was a bit of an issue, and it took a while to track down what the problem was. And it ends up being the CH340 UARTs chip. This is a cheaper chip compared to the, I think the CP2104 and 02 chips. That's a more expensive chip, and that's what you see on the other boards, on the mini and the dev boards. You see those, and that's that little square chip that sits right behind the UARTs, I'm sorry, the USB connection. Now the CH340 is a rectangular chip, and that chip, the issue is it uses GPIO 0 for its DTR and the RTS. And when we use it as an IO, it takes that port out, or it takes that pin out, and that prevents the sketch or the firmware from seeing that the serial port is there. And because it doesn't see the serial port, then it won't run, and when it won't run, it won't turn up the Wi-Fi. So that's what that problem is. So anytime you see that rectangular chip, then you make sure that you're not using anything on GPIO 0. And GPIO 0 is the very first I/O that the WIO uses. So when that one's excluded, then you only have 15 IOs for this particular board. But like the other room, it's well warranted to just exclude that one pin to get 15. So the installation process is pretty much the same. You use the Arduino RDE and then the Rota. You flash it, and you use the WeMos D1 R32 board configuration. Then with Rockrail, because it's a room file or a room chip, then you use that ESP32 D1 Mini, and you flash it, and then you can get this board going. So that pretty much wraps up. Now we've got 5 boards to use with the WIO and the ESP, which I think that's good, and it covers all the gamut. And as usual, I have the links there, the affiliate links on the in the description, and each one of them's connected to or associated with the board that I actually tested. So that way it's not questionable, because some of these boards look alike, but the way the pins are wired or the way the board is connected is different. And I think there's one board that has the GPIO pins are actually I think 19 and 22 are wired backwards, or the silk screen is labeled backwards. So if you use the pin, you're actually using 20 and not or I think 21 and not 19 or something like that. But anyway, the affiliate links are associated with all the boards that I used, and I'm not sponsored by anything. I buy these boards myself and then test them. So this ends it. We'll close up this whole board validation video, call it closed, and now we know we have 5 boards to use. So as usual, like, subscribe, and share. Talk to you guys later. Bye.